This morning I was asked to share a faith story with you, and although I jumped on the opportunity, I had no idea where to start. There have been countless times in my life where God has pushed and challenged me, leading me to encounter God in new ways. I have so many things I would love to say to you, but even though Mr. Benner gave me permission, since I agreed to go a bit longer, I'm going to try to get us out of here on time. And I have some pictures to help as you listen. I thought I could share with you all about my experience doing a semester abroad in the country of Peru in South America. I participated in Goshen College's study service term, which pushed me so far out of my comfort zone that I learned to become reliant on God in a completely new way. I could reflect on how hard the act of immersing myself in a completely different culture with a new language and new ways of doing things, and how hard that is and how many of you understand that here. And I could talk about how those 3 months I spent in Peru became an incredible awareness of how God could be a source of comfort and strength. I could do that. Or, you go to the next slide, I could follow up last week's alumni relations with some of my own. I could share with you the story of the struggle of my senior year of high school when I had an injury playing volleyball that changed the course of the next few years of my life. I could share with you about how my undiagnosed concussion took me out of the game, left me very weak with constant headaches, migraines, and many more difficulties that quickly sent me spiraling into a deep pit of despair. I suffered from panic attacks for the first time ever and was diagnosed with depression and an anxiety disorder that I fought hard with for the next 3 years of my life. I could share with you about how those sometimes suicidal days left me furious with God for allowing this to happen to me, and how eventually my journey led me towards healing and reconciliation, about how I learned to redirect my anger and realize that God wanted to use the suffering that I was enduring to help make me become the person I am today. Next slide. Or, as we anticipate Martin Luther King Day, I could reflect on my own journey with my race and my racial identity. I could share with you about the epiphany I had in high school when I suddenly realized that without the work of civil rights leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King, I literally would not exist. The challenges of growing up with a black father and white mother in a world that asked me to check one box or the other, and without having any friends that looked like me or understood my situation, was difficult. I could share that since I had to wrestle with my biracial identity, it led me with a deep sense of appreciation for my unique perspective, and for all of those who fought for it simply to exist. I could share how grateful I was to be able to help lead a workshop for biracial teens at a Mennonite youth convention in college and support them in their journeys. I could encourage the Doc student body to keep fighting for justice, to volunteer, to give freely and openly, and to serve the least of these. In the words of Chantel, our spiritual life speaker earlier this year, I could re-encourage you to be woke to the injustices around you and let God's love compel you to action. Yes, I could go into great detail about any one of these facets of my life, but those conversations will have to be for another time. As I was preparing this morning, I kept coming back to an area that has been especially challenging for me these past few years of my life. It's almost as if God was saying, yes, all of those stories are important elements of who you are, but this is what you need to share. This is what the DOT community needs to hear. So what was one of my biggest challenges in my faith journey these past few years? I have actively been working on accepting the fact that I am not in control of my situation, but that I can embrace the way I am in control of my response to my situation. I'm learning to surrender my expectations for my future in order to allow God to show me something greater. I expect to continue to wrestle with this for years to come since, well, taking up the cross and following Jesus is a difficult daily decision. Although I don't proclaim to have all of the answers, I wanted to share with you a bit about my experience, especially leading worship for the global church. I'll talk about how my expectations were challenged and shifted in small small ways that left a deep impact on me. And hopefully after this presentation, you'll feel like you know me a little bit better. Next slide. 2 summers ago was the Mennonite World Conference, which was held in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. For those of you who haven't heard of this event, the World Conference is a time for Anabaptists from around the world to gather together for fellowship and worship. Assemblies happen every 6 years in a different country every time, and are inspiring and spiritually nurturing. Several months preceding the conference, this time that was hosted by the United States, an announcement went out to all the churches that they were searching for musicians to serve on the International Vocal and Instrumental Ensemble. Although I was initially hesitant to apply, let's be honest, Mennonites are in general very musically gifted, I knew that music was one of my gifts, and I felt responsible to offer it to the global church if needed. I sent in my resume, applications, and several recordings and videos. Much to my surprise, I was accepted into the ensemble of 10 musicians representing 8 countries from around the world. I was ecstatic. I couldn't believe it. They sent us a walking list of about 50 songs and recordings in many, many different languages to learn before we all met for the first time a few days preceding the week-long conference. Being the good student that I was and always have been, I wanted to prepare for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I went about diligently learning my part for each song the week prior to the conference. Finally, July came, and it was time to head to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to gather with my international brothers and sisters in worship. Since I was a full-time volunteer, all of my travel needs were taken care of by the conference. I didn't know any details, but I assumed that I would be taken care of. I arrived at the Harrisburg airport around 10 p.m., jet-lagged and tired from my 2 layovers, yet open and excited about this new experience. I got off the plane, collected my luggage, and found a group with the sign, Mennonite World Conference. I had made it. There were others flying in for this event, so I checked in and waited for further direction as I was not in charge of my schedule. I was told we were waiting for a few more volunteers to arrive, and I would later be taken to the place where I was staying. So I sat down and made some small talk with others who were also waiting. An hour passed. I tried not to be impatient, but I started to feel a bit nervous. Was there a plan here? I reminded myself that I was serving, not running the show, and I tried to be patient. Another hour passed. By this time it was midnight, and several groups of conference participants had come and gone. I was a bit unnerved, but I continued to wait with 2 other musicians in the ensemble who had arrived. They weren't worried in the least. One was from Germany, the other from Angola. I tried to follow their lead. It seemed that their cultures were a bit more relaxed about this kind of thing. Finally, another hour passed, and the last musician arrived. She was coming from Mexico and had experienced several delays in her flights. I had now been sitting in the airport for 3 hours after leaving my home at 6 a.m. that morning, 18 hours ago. One of the leaders who came to pick her up finally helped us. He found out that we were supposed to stay in Akron, and since no one was around to take us, he graciously offered to drive us the hour and a half to our location. In that last hour car ride to our final destination, I sat in the back seat and fought back tears of exhaustion and frustration. This was not what I expected. My North American cultural expectations told me that I should have received details about where I was staying, how I was going to get from point A to point B, and maybe a contact name or a number in case something went wrong. I had none of that. Details, timeliness, and efficiency mattered to me, and this was the first experience that challenged those expectations. This week was off to a rather rocky start, but I prayed for continued patience to deal with the challenge of communication across cultures. I was not in control of my situation, but I knew this was how I was being called to serve the church, and I was determined to stay positive. The next day, we woke up early for our first musical rehearsals. Although I hadn't gotten as much sleep as I hoped, I reminded myself that I was there to serve. As a soprano, that's the part that I had been asked to learn and prepare, and have prepared. One of the members who was supposed to sing alto was having a hard time with her part, so the director chose to move her to soprano, since that's usually where the melody is and can be easier to learn. And in order to rebalance the group, she asked me to sing alto. I couldn't say no. I was there to serve, after all, but my musical sense knew that this change would help out our ensemble overall. But I had put in the time and the work and the energy to learn my part. This meant that I had to start back at square one. I don't even enjoy singing alto. That wasn't fair. This doesn't seem like a big deal to you. Let me put it this way. It was like preparing for your final chapter math test, and then the last minute being told you were actually being tested on a different chapter than the one that you had studied for. Or spending volleyball preseason preparing to play front row and then being moved to back row only for your very first game. This change began an internal struggle between my feeling personally frustrated and upset over my circumstance while still trying to stay positive. I spent the entire morning silently praying, pleading to God to help me embrace this change. I was there to serve, and I didn't want to feel bitter, but I did. After many prayers and trying to adjust my attitude, that afternoon something incredible happened. Instead of begrudgingly doing what I was told, I started to embrace it. I thought, you know what? I never get to sing the alto line, so maybe this is my chance to enjoy singing some harmonies I don't usually have. Next slide. I immediately connected with the two girls singing alto, and we became fast friends. By the end of the day, I was once again excited and ready to take on the week. The week that followed was incredibly challenging and invigorating as we led about 7,000 to 8,000 Anabaptists in worship. I created incredible bonds with the other musicians, and I felt like I was on an emotional and spiritual high. By the end of the week, I suffered from a migraine, and I nearly lost my voice, but somehow my spirit was not discouraged. The week was not anything that I expected, but I gained so much more by the way God gently nudged me into trusting His leading. Whether I was sitting in an airport for 3 hours, singing a part other than what I had prepared, or suffering with a health concern, I learned that I was in control of my attitude, and God could use it to help me make the most of my situation. All I needed to do was open myself up to willingly follow His call and trust that He would take care of me along the way. Next slide. The week serving the church presented me with a number of small yet significant reminders that God was in control. I'm so grateful for this experience and for the ways God stretched me in my understanding of different cultures and of having a heart and attitude for service. That said, I also want to share with you some big life decisions that God redirected and how I was eventually led here to Doc Mennonite Academy. Next. I was in the last few weeks of my senior year at Goshen College. I was almost done with my degree in music education and was planning to do a year of service with the Pulse program in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was excited to spend a year working in a nonprofit in the city and living in an intentional community with other young adults. Plus, my older sister lived in Pittsburgh, and I was excited to live near her again for the first time in 5 years. It was the day of my last spring concert at Goshen College, and my professor pulled me aside and asked me what my plans were for the next year. He then proceeded to tell me about a job opportunity that he thought I would be a perfect fit for. I left this conversation with a lump in my stomach. It had taken months to figure out what my plans were post-college, but I finally had it figured out. I was excited to go to Pittsburgh. I didn't want that to change. However, this professor introduced an opportunity that could potentially disrupt all of my plans and expectations for the next chapter in my life. After resisting the idea, yet receiving encouragement from my friends and family, I finally, reluctantly, applied for the music director position at Western Mennonite School located in Salem, Oregon. Within a week after I sent my resume, I was on a plane on my way to a state I had never even visited. Next slide. Long story short, I ended up taking the job, buying my parents' 2001 blue Grand Caravan minivan, filling it with all of my possessions, and driving across the country on a road trip with my older brother into the unknown. I didn't know a single person in the state of Oregon. I was a first-year teacher in a new environment with a new job and with no idea what I was getting but I knew deep down that this was where God was calling me next. I didn't hear God speaking literal words, but the Spirit had inspired a feeling in my gut that would not go away. I didn't know why, but I knew I had found the path God was nudging me down. I also knew it was going to be excruciatingly difficult at times. Still, I followed the call and tried to go with an open heart and mind. Next slide. My years at Western, I sensed I was undergoing growing pains as I dealt with the homesickness and loneliness that come from moving to a new place, and worked hard to learn how to do my job and live independently. I was blessed to be surrounded by a loving school community who took me in and offered me support as I transitioned to my new life in Oregon. I worked with students who quickly became, who I quickly connected with and loved deeply and experienced success in my work. I made amazing friends who introduced me to Oregon's many wonders, and I enjoyed going on hikes, spending time on the rocky Oregon coast, visiting fields of flowers in the spring, and getting together with friends to enjoy Blazers basketball games and Timbers soccer games. Although none of this happened immediately, I had finally started to feel like I could call Oregon home. I had no idea that was all about to change. Next slide. Fast forward to spring of 2016. I was helping to chaperone my school's junior-senior banquet, something I really enjoyed doing. While chatting with several of my junior students, they asked me to promise that I would be returning for their senior year. I laughed at them and assured them that yes, of course, I was planning to come back in the fall. I then, for some odd reason, felt compelled to ask. I can't make any promises about the future because I'm learning that God likes to change my plans. But unless something crazy happens, which it won't, I'll be there, don't worry. Obviously, something crazy happened, and once again, things did not go as I expected. This past summer, I was thrilled to have the flexibility to travel to different parts of the country and visit a number of family members, friends, and other loved ones. While I was traveling, I learned of the opening for a music teacher here at Dock. Honestly, when asked if I would consider the position by members of my community at the time, I shrugged it off. I had told my students in the spring that I was going to return, and that was my plan. Just like my plans for Pittsburgh, I didn't want them to change. However, despite my stubbornness, I couldn't escape the inspired twinge in my gut again, telling me that this was something I needed to explore. It was as if God had shoved this amazing, scary opportunity in my face, and even though I kept trying to look away, I couldn't. Was this really where I was being called to go next? Leave my community, join a completely new one? Move from one side of the country to the other again? Next slide. As we near the end of the semester, let me put it in a way that you might resonate with. It was as if God was telling me, okay, Emily, I know next week you thought you would start semester 2 at Dock, but instead, I want you to go to a completely new school. I know you only have a weekend to prepare, but it will be time enough. I know you already met with guidance and you've made your schedule, but I'm adding new classes to the list and I will help you change it. I know you don't have a place to live, but I will give you one, complete with a loving and supportive new roommate and friend. I know this means that you have to leave most of your belongings behind, but I will provide for you. I know you don't want to leave your friends, but I will be your friend, and I will help you make new ones. I know you love your current students, but I will use you to connect with and impact new ones. And Melissa, today. I know you love the West Coast, but I'll show you a new one, the East Coast. I made more than one beach, you know. I know this is going to be difficult, but I'm going to help you grow. I know you think this is impossible, but with me, everything is possible. I know this wasn't your plan, but it was mine, and I will be with you every step of the way. Do you trust me? And that's how God brought me here. So I leave you with this. Do you trust that God will guide you through every circumstance, even the ones you didn't plan for? Remember, you may not be in control of your circumstance, but you can choose how to respond, and you can choose to let God work in your life. You can choose to make the most of every situation through your attitude. Things will not always go as planned, trust me. But sometimes this is when God shows us just what he's capable of. Thank you.
So may those stories of God's faithfulness, God's word to us, and the worship of God go with you today. Class is beginning time.